Talk of the Town. I'm Phil Arno. This week we celebrated Earth Day, if that's a good word for it. Started in 1970, Earth Day and the movement that accompanied it has made a big difference in this country. I remember growing up in Western New York, you could stand in Lake Erie and look down. You wouldn't be able to see the bottom of the lake. It was so dirty that you couldn't see your toes. As a young child, my parents used to drive from North Buffalo every Sunday to visit relatives in Hamburg. And going past Lackawanna, there would be this yellowish fog that seemed to coat all the buildings. It smelled like rotten eggs. And now in this country, we've kind of cleaned it up. In this area, as a pilot, 10 miles used to be good visibility. Now 30 or 40 miles is good. It's normal. The Great Lakes are fresh again. People recycle. They don't litter nearly as much as they used to. Everybody, at least in this country, takes the environment more seriously than they used to. This is all good. America is full of good people. Western New York is full of good people. We try to do the right thing. We pay attention when we're told of a problem that could affect us, our family, our friends, our neighbors, and that's a good thing. We try to help. Who could argue against a caring society? But there is a downside. There's a brief explanation of politics that I've learned growing up in this industry as a news person for the last 40 years. I've learned that things happen behind the scenes, mostly because there's a reason that people don't think about very often. For as long as humans have been on this earth, they've been controlled by some form of government, a ruler, a dictator, a democracy. But make no mistake, those governments have never been here just to serve the people. That may sound harsh or crazy, but think about it. Governments are here to survive. They survive by controlling the population, controlling what you do, your behavior. And how do they control you? They control you through your money. Money is, after all, power. Unfortunately, when you come up with a topic that's universally accepted, for instance, a clean, healthy earth, there's always a segment of the society that's going to look after that cause, look at that cause and take the position that that's an advantage for them. They can take that situation and use it for gain, to take more control or to gain more money. Obviously, the people who think more about that are the people in government or the people who can influence government and influence your money. I'd like to show you something now that might be an example of what we're talking about. Can we play that first clip?
No challenge poses a greater threat to future generations than climate change. And the best scientists in the world are all telling us that our activities are changing the climate. And if we don't act forcefully, we'll continue to see rising oceans, longer, hotter heat waves, dangerous droughts and floods, and massive disruptions that can trigger greater migration and conflict and hunger around the globe.
Now, it says something when the President of the United States tells us that the single most important thing we have to worry about is weather. It's not terrorists, it's not the economy, it's not cancer, it's weather. What it tells us, if you really look into it, is there's more power to be had, there's more political advantage to making the environment your biggest threat. We don't often hear another side to this argument, and there's a good reason for this. There's a lot of power to be had, there's a lot of control to be had if you are convinced that this is a threat to you. If you deny global warming, and now it's not called global warming anymore, because when you were sitting there or standing there in your driveway under 5 feet of snow shoveling, global warming, that phrase didn't quite touch home with you. Now it's called climate change. So when you're thinking about climate change, if somebody is going to deny that, they're either demonized as somebody who hates the planet or is just greedy and wants to make money because they're an industrialist, or they're made fun of as somebody who just basically is a clown or doesn't know what they're talking about. Very rarely do you ever hear anybody debate on this subject, tell both sides. But there is another side. Listen to, among others, the man who co-founded Greenpeace. Let's play clip number 6 there.
Carbon dioxide clearly is an industrial gas and sort of tied in with economic growth, with transportation in cars, with what we call civilization. And there are forces in the environmental movement that are simply against economic growth. They think that's bad.
Patrick Moore is considered one of the foremost environmentalists of his generation. He is co-founder of Greenpeace.
The shift to climate being a major focal point came about for 2 very distinct reasons. The first reason was because by the mid-'80s, a majority of people now agreed with all of the reasonable things we in the environmental movement were saying they should do. Now, when a majority of people agree with you, it's pretty hard to remain confrontational with them. And so the only way to remain anti-establishment was to adopt ever more extreme positions. When I left Greenpeace, it was in the midst of them adopting a campaign to ban chlorine worldwide. Like I said, you guys, this is one of the elements in the periodic table, you know. I mean, I'm not sure if that's in our jurisdiction to be banning a whole element.
Destroying the wall, we're soon down.
The other reason that environmental extremism emerged was because world communism failed, the wall came down, and a lot of peaceniks and political activists moved into the environmental movement, bringing their neo-Marxism with them, and learned to use green language in a very clever way to cloak agendas that actually have more to do with anti-capitalism and anti-globalization than they do anything with ecology or science.
Now, that clip was from a documentary called The Great Global Warming Swindle. It's by Martin Durkin. And I advise you to get either something like that, or if you look on the internet, there are plenty of other sides to the argument. And look at both sides, not just the one. A good informed public is what we need, because then you can make a judgment on your own. Don't listen to me, but at least if I do my job correctly, I'm giving you food for thought. Now, back at the start of last winter, when we were already shoveling massive amounts of snow, I invited our friend Andy Parker, Channel 7 meteorologist, in to talk about our weather and the climate.
And when you look at an image like this, where it takes an army of snow throwers to go and take what Mother Nature put in your front yard and just get it out of the way to return to normalcy, a lot of people think, well, where is, this global warming and all the things that you may have heard about that over the years? And we are definitely a 4-season community. We enjoy all of them, and some of them people more than others enjoy this, but so many stories came out of this, and it's a short-term storm, but when you think about climate change, global warming, the potential for that, that's always a long-term trend. So the two should be viewed differently.
Well, there's 3 aspects to the climate change story. There's the science, there's the politics, and then there's the media coverage.
Yep. And
they're all kind of unrelated, but they have a common thread. The media, for instance, they love to tell a story about a plane crash or a 4-alarm fire or something that's going to sensationalize, get your interest. As you were saying earlier when we were talking, the louder they can scream, the more attention they can get, and then they're relevant. The media is relevant. Politics, anytime, and there's a famous phrase, never let a crisis go to waste. If you have a crisis, if they can scare you about what's coming, then politicians can spend more money and they can be more powerful. Then there's the science of it, and that's what I want to get into with you right now, and that is, I've read that sunspots are primarily the driver of climate, and that there's been a pattern of ups and downs as long as we can remember, as long as records have been kept. Like, for instance, the 20s, 30s, and 40s were a warm period and dry, and the 50s, 60s, and 70s were cold and a little more wet. and then it started to warm up again in the 80s. So is that basically the bottom line if you cut through everything?
Yeah, a lot of the decades have their own personalities, if you will. And you touched on a few of those going back to the 50s and 60s, the Dust Bowl. You could even go further back. And what you're finding is that the decades do take on a personality. And I don't know that the book has been written on the teens yet, but certainly this winter is going to go a long way in influencing that. But a single event is should not be the driver of a decade. And when you think about what causes those decadal shifts or changes, if you will, a lot of that now has been attributed to the oceans, the ocean currents as they change. More and more, meteorology and oceanography and climatology are all kind of coming together to pool their resources so that there's a better understanding of the global engine. And it's something that the jury is still out on this. There's still a lot of unknowns when it comes to what forces large global climate change and how big of a role man plays in it. Obviously, man has a role. We shape the earth. We can shape what goes into the atmosphere, but a volcano can do that also.
I was just going to say that.
On an enormous scale on its own.
In one eruption, you know, Mount Pinatubo or Mount St. Helens, in one eruption, a volcano will put out more carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur gases than mankind, all of mankind can do in decades.
Yeah,
and that's just in one afternoon.
It can cause what people term a year without a summer because of the soot and the dampening of the atmosphere, and that changes things as well. But again, it isn't a permanent change. It's something that is a temporary. Eventually it will dilute, and the Earth's engine has an amazing ability to balance. When one side gets cold, another gets warm, and then it will eventually balance that back out. And what drives that balance, there's a lot of unknowns. Sunspots, the upper level wind patterns, how the cold air stacks in the polar regions, when that gets unleashed, hurricanes and typhoons. The thing that really spawned this event can be traced back to Super Typhoon Nuri, which recurved past Japan, ended up into the Gulf of Alaska, blows up into a giant storm there, upsets the jet stream, unleashes the cold air that comes across the warmer lakes in an early season event, and have the winds line up just perfectly so that the airport doesn't get it, but that places like Lancaster, South Buffalo, West Seneca are inundated by an event early in the week. And you'll notice the bullseye there,
right there,
south of Buffalo. The north towns were bystanders on this event because of the wind direction that came across the open waters of Lake Erie. And now if you watch very closely here, the next graphic that we're going to show is going to take you to the second lake effect event, and that bullseye shifts just a few miles to the south. We're talking about Sturgeon Point, Angola, Eden, Evans, as you get into Orchard Park, Hamburg, Colden, Boston, East Aurora, and then Cowlsville, portions of Wyoming County. Huge numbers that for the entirety of the 2 or 3 day period exceeded 60 inches of snow.
And it's all dependent on the air temperature, the water temperature, and the wind direction.
Those are the three main pieces. There's a recipe or a formula for lake effect snow. You need a warm body of water. We had a lake temperature that was in the upper 40s at that time. The air temperature at the surface was only in the teens, but really you look at the air temperature at 5,000 feet or about a mile up. Being a pilot, you know that's not a very long distance. We had air temperatures that were minus 14, and when you go up to 10,000 feet, it was even more than that. You need 23 degrees of a temperature difference to even get the process going. We had an extreme instability between the lake water and that air. It was almost a 60-degree temperature difference in a little over a mile, and that's what caused those images, that boiling up of the lake.
This is a prime example right here.
Yeah.
In the video, you can see the rising of the water vapor into the air. And when this water vapor gets to a certain altitude, it becomes so cold because of the colder temperatures at altitude that it just turns into snow.
It condenses, and at that temperature it forms, instead of water droplets, it forms ice crystals, and those ice crystals piled up in terms of feet inland away from the lake. I had an opportunity to actually head down here just over the Skyway and stand within a stone's throw of that edge or snow blanket or snow curtain, and it really was a fantastic meteorological event.
Well, every area has their little idiosyncrasies. I mean, we have the lake effect. I lived in Southern California for some time, and they have their Santa Ana winds and various weather phenomena that are specific to that geographical outlight, you know, that area, the terrain. This is what we live with. And people from around the country don't quite understand that. I got calls asking how I was, when this event was taking place and people were buried under 6 feet of snow. And in my area, to the north towns, I had 4 inches. And actually, for most of the event, I could see the grass sticking out through the little coating of snow. So it's something that is so specific to this area that it's just people don't understand it around the country.
Yeah, our lakes drive more than, obviously this is the most dramatic image. It's the one that's going to get passed around the world. Unfortunately, you go back to Johnny Carson, didn't do us any favors. This storm, I think, is going to kind of reinforce the fact that Buffalo does get snow. It's how we embrace it, how we repair ourselves, and how we move on that'll eventually change that persona. But this is the piece that gets passed around, but the lake has an influence on all 4 of our seasons. Some of the influences are better than others, too.
Well, we have some of the nicest summers in the entire country because we have an air conditioner in the form of Lake Erie right off of our water front. So we have the benefit of that.
Yeah, some seasons it will actually dampen the clouds, provide more sunshine, cool us when we need it to be cool, but it also provides us snow when it's time for the winter season.
Well, now climate change takes into account long-term predictions. We have maps that show predictions for the upcoming season. Very often, such as this map, for the winter temperature outlook for the season, you can't tell what's going to happen 10 days from now with any certainty. How can they take a guess at the tendencies that are going to take place over the coming months?
Well, when you look at a map like this, it's not going to tell you that next Tuesday you're going to have a snowstorm or it's going to be 22 degrees in the morning. This is a generalization for an entire season, which you're going to look at this and say the winter temperature outlook for 2014 and 2015, which is actually December, January, and February. And it's going to let you know whether or not your location has a higher probability of being warmer than normal, at normal, or cooler than normal. And that is not done by a single day alone, but it usually takes a set of 10 days during the course of the month to have a departure from normal, either colder or warmer. So what it will do is look at the global weather patterns, the driver, the jet stream, and it will say the jet stream is predicted to buckle to the north for a 10-day period of time during one of these months, and that would allow your average temperature to be a little warmer than normal. It doesn't mean winter's not coming. It just means, are you going to have a severe outbreak of cold during that particular season or not? And what this particular map is showing is that the West Coast has a higher probability of being warmer than normal. If you're in the Gulf Coast states, you're likely to have more days during the season that are going to be at normal or cooler. Here in Western New York and most of the northern tier, you're going to have your typical winter, which is you're going to have some periods above and some below. But overall, it's not going to lean one direction, either record-setting cold or record-setting warmth.
Well, we've gotten very, very good at near-term forecasts. From the time I was a little kid to now, the accuracy of the 7-day forecast has increased phenomenally.
Thank you very much.
Well, beyond that, though, it's almost like you can't lose because if you say there's a 30% chance of rain and it doesn't rain, then you're right, and if it does rain, then you're also right.
Well, that's what we call that hedging the bets in certain circles, and certainly the big joke is, well, you could put a 50% chance of something on every single day, and if a meteorologist did that, I don't think his audience would stick around that long. So there are ways when you look ahead. I mean, this is a great postcard picture, by the way, some of the images you're seeing on the screen.
Some people did have fun.
Yeah, when you think about the longer term trends, the 3-day forecast has really been the one that people now look at and say, hey, I believe that. The 7-day, they see I call it a trend because you see whether it's going to be above or below, but to stick an actual number is tough. Every now and again, there are certain signs in the upper atmosphere that you can see a bend, a dip, something that will indicate you're going to have a downtrend in excess of 10 days out. Doesn't happen all the time, but we're learning more and more what to look for. So that's how the science of meteorology has really evolved.
I'd like to thank Andy Parker for stopping by and giving us his input. As far as the argument about global warming, one of the main arguments that the environmentalists use, that man is creating climate change, is CO2. They say that industry, cars, breathing, CO2 is the driver of man-made global warming. Well, as part of our presentation today, I'm going to play a clip that gives you a little bit of the other side. Let's play clip 3.
Why do we suppose that carbon dioxide is responsible for our changing climate? CO2 forms only a very small part of the Earth's atmosphere. In fact, we measure changes in the level of atmospheric CO2 in tens of parts per million.
If you take CO2 as a percentage of all the gases in the atmosphere, the oxygen, the nitrogen, and argon, and so on, it's 0.054%. It's an incredibly small portion. And then, of course, you've got to take that portion that supposedly humans are adding, which is the focus of all the concern, and it gets even smaller.
So here we're looking at the ice core record from Vostok, and in the red we see temperature going up from early time to later time at a very key interval when we came out of a glaciation. And we see the temperature going up, and then we see the CO2 coming up. CO2 lags behind that increase. It's got an 800-year lag. So temperature is leading CO2 by 800 years.
There have now been several major ice core surveys. Every one of them shows the same thing. The temperature rises or falls, and then after a few hundred years, carbon dioxide follows.
So obviously, carbon dioxide is not the cause of that warming. In fact, we can say that the warming produced the increase in carbon dioxide.
CO2 clearly cannot be causing temperature changes. It's a product of temperature. It's following temperature changes.
The ice core record goes to the very heart of the problem we have here. They said, if the CO2 increases in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, then the temperature will go up. But the ice core record shows exactly the opposite. So the fundamental assumption, the most fundamental assumption of the whole theory of climate change due to humans is shown to be wrong.
Now, as someone who's done a lot of stories on this subject with meteorologists throughout the years, and many, many years ago it was about global cooling, then it became global warming, and then it became climate change. But one thing that was consistent with all the meteorologists that I did this story with, people who have no axe to grind, they have no agenda, they all said the same thing. They basically talked about the drivers of climate, the drivers of weather. And a good explanation I found is in this next clip.
In 2005, astrophysicists from Harvard University published the following graph in the official journal of the American Geophysical Union. The blue line represents temperature change in the Arctic over the past 100 years. And here is the rise in carbon dioxide over the same period. The two are not obviously connected. But now look again at the temperature record and at this red line, which depicts variations in solar activity over the past century as recorded independently by scientists from NASA and America's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Solar activity over the last 100 years, over the last several hundred years, correlates very nicely on a decadal basis with sea ice and Arctic temperatures.
For many scientists, the conclusion is inescapable.
The sun is driving climate change. CO2 is irrelevant.
And finally, as someone who's spent my entire working life in the media, I have to admit that I've seen a lot in this business that's quite disturbing. And there's plenty of good people out there working in the media, delivering the news to you, especially on the local level. This has been a different kind of talk of the town. I hope you've had patience with me as I've delivered this, this subject. I urge you not to listen just to me or to one side, these clips, or to the media, the stories that you see in the paper every day, but do the research on your own. And when you look at stories that you see in the media, like global warming, or how popcorn is dangerous for you, or how drinking water out of a hose can shorten your life, sit back, take a breath, take all those stories with a grain of salt, which, by the way, I'm told is not as bad as it once was thought to be. Anyway, thanks for watching WBBZ. Thanks for watching Talk of the Town. We'll see you next time.
This land is your land, this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. As I was walking a ribbon of highway, I saw above me an endless skyway. I saw below me a golden